You sure?
Yeah. Be an inventor.
First man to walk on the moon. That'd be something.
We've chosen a job so difficult, requiring so many technological developments. We're gonna have to start from scratch. Only after we master these tasks do we consider trying to land on the moon.
Neil, if this flight is successful, you'll go down in history. What kind of thoughts do you have about that?
We're planning on the flight being successful.
Damn, that is a big mother.
It'll go up like a half-kiloton A-bomb if it blows.
The vehicle's not safe.
We need to fail down here so we don't fail up there.
This isn't just another trip, Neil. You're not just going to work.
Do you think you're coming back?
There are risks, but we have every intention of coming back.
Somebody got a Swiss Army knife?
A Swiss Army knife? Are you kidding me?
Here we go.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
Do you question whether the program's worth the cost in money and in lives?
You're down here and you look up and you don't think about it too much, but space exploration changes your perception. And it allows us to see things that we should have seen a long time ago.
We have serious problems.
We've got this under control.
You're a bunch of boys. You don't have anything under control.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? Whoa! You guys are excited, aren't you?
Hello, Toronto!
This is a very exciting night for us.
I'm really freaking excited to be here tonight.
What a great audience.
I'm so excited to be here. It's such a great honor.
And I'm so honored to be able to show my film to this august crowd.
What's really fun is people who love film, and you are all that, and we're very proud and happy to be here with all of you.
We should not be afraid to tell stories because we are afraid that people will judge.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity and a platform to be able to showcase our work as female filmmakers.
This is for my parents who couldn't come, so thank you. I'm going to prove it to them. I did it!
I've just realized what TIFF actually stands for. Toronto is fantastic.
This is the story of our city, and we're a very proud city, and I want the world to see it.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Janelle Riley, and I am so thrilled to welcome you to this press conference with a movie that is not only one of the most stunning technical achievements, but emotional achievements that I have ever seen. And I'd love to start with our director, Damien Chazelle. You and Ryan were here just 2 years ago with a little movie called La La Land. I was sort of disappointed that didn't really take off. I thought it was really good. And was hoping to see more of it, but seriously, after the resounding success of that movie, I feel like you could have done anything. I don't know if people were offering you Marvel movies or big budget blockbusters, but you already had First Man in mind as your next project, didn't you?
Yeah, Ryan and I had actually, the first time we ever met was initially to talk about this movie. I think I was sort of in the early stages of getting La La Land off the ground, but really I had just done Whiplash, and I guess I saw this movie initially as almost sort of an opportunity to explore a similar theme, just the cost of a goal and the cost of certain kinds of ambition. So I met with Ryan, talked about it. The conversation segued to Gene Kelly pretty quickly, and then we did La La Land together. But yeah, right from the get-go, I knew I wanted to work with him on this.
And Ryan, I'm curious because I think actually probably most people on this stage might not have even been born when Neil Armstrong took his walk on the moon. What did you know about Neil Armstrong going into this project, and how did reading the script change your perceptions of him?
Well, I think as soon as I learned what the moon was, I learned that a man named Neil Armstrong walked on it. So he was always synonymous with the moon, but like the moon, I knew very little about him. And when I met with Damien, and he told me about, you know, that he wanted to sort of uncover the man behind the myth. And once I started to learn about Neil and his wife Janet, I realized that there was this incredible life was really deserving of the tribute that Damien wanted to pay to it, and it was an incredible opportunity, but it was an enormous responsibility.
I think I was a little surprised to learn how reserved he was, both publicly and to some extent privately, because usually when you think of your heroes, you think of them having kind of these bombastic lives, and I thought it was so interesting to show a portrayal of a man who was so internal. And did you always know that that would translate to, you know, good cinema?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think in some ways I've always been interested in people who have a hard time communicating their emotions in maybe the sort of quote-unquote normal way. You know, something with a musical is you kind of can resort to song and dance to communicate those emotions in a way that words can't. With Neil, I think it was, there was such poetry, I think, for me, just looking at his life, in the sort of story of someone who, in many cases, seemed to sublimate his emotions into his work and into this passion that he had ever since he was a little boy, of passion for aviation. And this is someone who learned how to fly before he learned how to drive. Ryan and I spent some time up in the cornfields in Ohio where he grew up, at his old farmhouse where he grew up. And you know, it's not in the movie, but it kind of informed a lot of what we did in the movie, where you just go there, you see the sea of you know, flat cornfields and this giant sky, and you can kind of immediately understand why Ohio produces more astronauts than any other state in the U.S., any other part of the world. And so just this idea of someone who was continually drawn up there, couldn't even communicate why necessarily maybe, but just needed to find answers up there, became, I think, the real through line for us. And then how that makes it difficult for someone who's so kind of has his eyes so locked up at the sky, how difficult it can be to lock his eyes down on Earth and to actually engage and communicate on Earth.
We are so fortunate to have Neil's sons, Rick and Mark, here. It's such an honor. I'm curious, over the years, did people come to you wanting to tell Neil's story? Did you ever think that this would happen?
No. I don't know how many people approached him. I think he said no to everybody until Jim Henson. I think Jim came with an approach that was more technical in nature, and then
more academic.
Then he not sure, you know, I didn't think he envisioned a movie or anything like that, you know, yeah. But he did consent to that, and he did some 50 or 60 hours of interviews with Jim, and then he pretty much let him write, you know, whatever he took away from those interviews. Wow. I think there was another 10 or 15 years or something before a movie came out, and I couldn't tell you why it took that long. But you know, I do think he you'd be pleased with the result. Okay.
Yes.
It's high praise from Neil.
I was going to say, yeah, he might have cracked a smile at it, and that would have been like the best review you could ask for.
I think that's a fair assumption.
That's a line from the film, for those of you that don't know. Dad's asked, how did you feel when you were chosen to be the, to command the first mission to the moon? And he said, I was pleased. And it shows his gift for understatement, but it also is what actually happened.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that it's one of many moments that is portrayed in the film that is exactly what happened and the way it happened. And I think that speaks to the authenticity of the film. And I just really want to congratulate all of these folks for the great work that they did.
Actually, I want to talk about the authenticity, but I actually want to ask all the actors, you're portraying real people, some of whom are still alive in several cases. Do you feel an additional responsibility as opposed to when you're creating a character from scratch? And were you able to meet with any of your real life counterparts? And how did that change your perception, if at all?
Well, Buzz came to my very last day of shooting, which was nerve-wracking, because it's a huge responsibility, and I don't think the movie pulls punches. It's not sentimental, but I could rest comfortably knowing that this was the best researched movie I've certainly ever been a part of. I think all the actors were so well informed about who they were playing, and of course, Damien understood, rendezvous mechanics as well as any as well as the astronaut. He knew all the technical terms, and I felt like there was so much attention to detail across the board.
Well, Buzz speaks his mind, as we see in the movie. I mean, what did he say when he took a look at you?
He said he could recommend somebody to look at my hair. Yeah.
He's just saying what we're all thinking,
Yeah.
That's his thing. Patrick, for you?
We were down in Florida at the Space Center there, and we went into the Astronaut Hall of Fame. We were all there to do some training, and the young lady showing us around was like, "Hey, all your guys are in there. You can go see the plaque of your guy." And we went in, and I might get into some spoilers here, but it is historical. So we got in there, and I play Elliot C. So I was looking around for Elliot, and then I realized like all the plaques have mission patches underneath them, and Elliot never got to fly a mission, and it struck me pretty profoundly being in that room, and I missed Elliot when I was in there looking at all the astronauts, because there's a lot of the new 9 that are in there, and Ed and Roger and Gus and everybody, and so I felt it was important to miss Elliot after he's gone in the film, and I think
Well,
maybe we
and
did.
it's such a beautiful tribute to him in the movie too, to like know his name and.
Yeah, right, because he flies under the radar pretty easily.
Kyle, for you?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I appreciate your dress. No one's commenting.
I was worried it was too on the nose, but they said go for it, so I appreciate
Wasn't
it.
lost on me, I'll tell you. No, yes, we want.
Oh, what a gentleman! You're so Canadian.
Everyone obviously wants to portray the character in a particular way, because they are real people. It is an incredible event, one of the probably more incredible events that has taken place on Earth and beyond. And but all the characters in this are so rich, and we're lucky enough, at least myself personally, for Deke Slayton. There's so much information. And there's so much, you can go to YouTube and look at all these conferences, and his past is really well recorded. And so you could really get in there and find things to ground yourself. So I really enjoyed doing this character because I felt like I had cinder blocks on my feet, you know, and I had a particular part to play, which I really enjoyed. It was a fun part, but there was a responsibility, I'm sure everyone senses, to live up to these guys who, my guy particularly, went through World War II and beyond, and so he came even from another generation that had a different sensibility.
Mhm.
So even that in the scenes, I had that going. So it was a very interesting part to play, and it was proud to be able to do it. So.
And Ryan, for you, I mean, I'm trying to think. You've played real people before, I feel like. I don't know if, you know, if it's Wayne at the back of your mind, you're playing such a recognizable icon. And from what I understand, I believe Mark and Rick were really helpful in your research.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, the greatest challenge of this movie, and there were many, was that they were going to see the film when this was over. And I thought about that often. But yeah, they were just extremely, you know, helpful and supportive and always available to answer questions. And also was able to meet Janet, which was very honored to meet her and spend time with her in her home. Neil's sister, June. Damien mentioned we got to spend time with her at the farm where Neil grew up. I've never had more help on a film. Really, between family, friends, colleagues of Neil, as well as you know, Jim's thoroughly researched book, and him constantly being on set. It was, I've never had more help and more people that were happy to help. You could really feel how much love everyone had for Neil and Janet and their legacy, and wanted to, you know, make sure that they gave us every bit of information they could, so that, you know, if something was inaccurate, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't because they left it out.
And I want to ask the actresses, because something I love so much about this movie is that quite often in films like this, the female characters are sort of on the sidelines looking worried. And that's true of often wives in any historical film. But Janet is such a powerful character, not just to Neil's story, but to the story overall. And Olivia, I mean, Patricia, she really shows us kind of the personal impact that these men risking their lives have. Were you sort of surprised when you read the script just how complex these roles were, and is that part of what appealed to you about the parts?
Definitely, to get to play a woman that is both strong and on the team and not in the shadows, and then also shown to be vulnerable. I mean, that's like an incredible character. So yeah, that was definitely what attracted me to the role, and I think Josh really made a point of that in his story, to have it be about the family, not just the man.
Yeah. It was devastating to see her after she lost her husband. I didn't know if, you know, we just wouldn't see her again, and then when we do, it's like really, really tough.
I think the thing is that Janet and Pat and all the women who were left at home were extraordinary, but I think it takes a filmmaker like Damien, who, those stories are there. It's not like those women were always there, just nobody was interested. You know, the story was here. The story was with the men who were going to the moon, and that's what I think the film's so amazing at doing, is the humanity of the men who were going was also not that important to anybody. Nobody really wanted to know that they had lives and that they had arguments with their wives and their kids and, you know, all those things. And I think it takes a filmmaker to shine the light on that and say that that's the real story, really. That's the story we want to know. We don't want to know what we've been told and fed and, you know, makes us believe in heroes and that all these people have superpowers. We, you know, and I can't read a script that's like that, I'm afraid. And so when I read, it was just, I just read the script and was just like, you know, that's something I want to, you know, please let me be in it, really.
And were you able to consult with Janet?
Not directly, no. I never got a chance to meet her. I spoke to two of her very close friends, Valerie Anders and Jan Evans, who were extraordinary, really. It's quite amazing and also a bit scary when you talk to people and they say, you know, you do realise you're going to play someone who's truly special and whose friends love her and who gave so much of herself for other people. And because then you go, oh, God, I've got to do that. You know, and Rick and Mark were so generous and kind and never made me feel like I was a weirdo, kind of asking really, you know, questions about the working of the house and, you know, what their relationship was like with their mum. And that was so important. You know, I was so lucky that we had that generosity and kindness, really.
And Rick and Mark, I know that sadly we lost Janet just a few months ago. What is it like to see this story, especially when it's so accurate? It's got to, you know, ring even more true. What is it like to see your parents and yourselves portrayed on screen like this?
Well, I've seen the movie 4 or 5 times now, and I saw it again last night, and I'm still crying. You know, my wife has a tissue, and she just kind of very quietly hands it to me, and you know, I try to make sure nobody's, you know, noticing, but that's the impact of these performances and at a personal level, and so I think that really speaks to how authentic, again, the movie is and the performances are.
One thing the movie touches on that nobody really talks about, or at least I haven't seen it yet, is how supportive the wives were of one another. That was a key piece of making that work. And there's a scene where I think you two and Marilyn C. are I think in your house. And that kind of stuff happened all the time. And the wives really were the one, because the guys were gone. They were gone a lot. And they were the only ones that could, you know, sort of relate to one another and help each other out. And that's a very important story and a very important contribution to making the whole thing work.
By the way, when you knew Neil's sons were going to be here, did you expect kids to come out? Because there was part of me that was like, oh, that's right, they're grown men now. I actually do love the relationship between the wives so much, and you guys have great chemistry together. I'm sort of curious, was that instantaneous, or is that something that sort of built up?
Yes, it was.
I mean, was it instant? She came over for a dinner.
I did.
She brought her daughter.
Yeah.
My creepy obsession with.
She loves my daughter much more than she loves me.
No. I mean,
yeah, I don't really. I think we all had it felt like there was no start of the movie. It didn't feel like we were like, okay, this is the first day of shooting. Everyone behave yourselves, quit, start acting. I think it was really slow, and we all just got to know each other, and then suddenly we started shooting, and no one was really paying attention, and then it felt like it was seamless, really.
Right.
And I think sometimes that tension and that kind of can stop people having actual relationships, and I think a lot of the relationships have just bled into one, really. But I really loved Janet and Pat. I just loved it. I loved that relationship, and they were so different. My God,
I know.
Such different women, but found such a unity and kind of understanding, and really loved each other.
Yeah, and we got to. I know you guys had to spend a couple weeks improvising as a family, and then also I got to join on the last day of that. We hung out at the pool while Neil cleaned the pool, and Janet and I just got to sit there and sip lemonade and tell him how to do it. And but it really was helpful. I feel like Damien really cared about helping us all develop authentic relationships, and having that time to improvise and laugh and joke with one another gave us kind of the foundation to film some of the scripted stuff.
You guys have talked about the accuracy of this movie, and I know you I guess, commissioned Josh Singer, the Oscar-winning writer of Spotlight, who's so good at combining journalistic with artistic. And did that attention to detail, did that make it harder on you, or did it not matter? Like you were going to be accurate at all costs?
No, I mean, I think especially because Josh was there, shouldering so much of that burden, it was much easier than it would have been. I mean, that was my big worry in a way before tackling this, more so than trying to tackle space sequences or the set pieces. It was my first time tackling a subject matter that wasn't kind of my own experience. Everything I'd done up till then, I'd written myself and largely kind of at least paralleled with experiences I'd had. And here, I knew I needed to reach outside of myself, and so I wanted to work with another writer. I was very, I like to sort of toot my horn and say that, because it's true that I hired Josh before Spotlight was ever shot, so I got to kind of go around town, being very proud when Spotlight did what it did. But I think that movie and other works of Josh's speak to just, as you're saying, this combination he's able to find between the sort of dense, factual, journalistic approach, and using that to carve out a story and to carve out something that can be cinematic. He spent about 4 years researching this, and while I was shooting La La Land with Ryan, he was spending time at the Cape and at Houston and meeting with former astronauts and spending time with Rick and Mark. So there was already this incredible foundation between him and Jim Henson, an incredible foundation by the time Ryan and I and the rest of the cast really sort of dove in. And then it was kind of all up to us to do our own independent research and for every cast member and also every department head here to just sort of, involved in the movie. Everyone, I think, took it very seriously, but that was especially because of the bar that had been already set by Josh and Jim.
Did that attention to detail, did that ever become difficult? Because Ryan, I'm claustrophobic. So you're really in these like tin cans, and I think they're like sealing you in. I mean, did you have to just sit in there for hours? And what did you do to pass the time?
Just sort of sat in there for hours. There was always someone, when we were shooting the mission sequences, there was always somebody who had been directly involved with that mission in some way. Like, for instance, when we shot the X-15 sequence, Joe Engel was there, who was the last living X-15 pilot, or Al Warden, or Frank Borman. So we had I think they were obviously there to help ensure the accuracy, but I think they were also there to ensure that it was impossible to complain because they had really experienced it. So there was anytime you thought you would see them and you'd think, oh, that's right. It was immediate perspective, helpful perspective.
Did any of the astronauts, was there any sort of a boot camp where they, taught you how to properly float in space or anything like that?
I went separately. I started a little bit later. And
because you're Buzz and no one wants to be around you.
Exactly, it was sort of helpful to be a little alienated. And we did this sort of a zero-G simulator. It was a dream come true. I was really, I felt like a kid, going to space camp. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was fascinating. A big group of us, aside from Buzz and Neil, went down to Houston and Florida, like I was talking about, and they had a lot of the old, jankety equipment that they used to train for the Apollo missions. So we got to get on those kinds of things, and they were like these archaic hydraulic systems that had been digitized, but the ingenuity of them was pretty incredible. And then we got to, of course, we played around in stuff that I don't think we can even really talk about, but they had all these crazy robots and inventions and cars that could go every direction, and they had this contraption that made it feel like you were working on the space station. So if you touched something a little too firmly, you'd float off into space, and they'd be like, "Yep, you're dead. All right, next up." That kind of thing. It was pretty cool. I mean, like Corey says, it was like being a kid at space camp.
Damien, did you go play? I shouldn't say play. Did you go conduct research? Because this sounds so fun.
I was very jealous because I went several times to Houston and to the Cape and spent as much time there as I could, but I I remember we set up this like training, a week or so of training for Ryan, and then for the rest of the cast, and then for Corey. And then they would come back to me with these stories and pictures of like driving the Mars rover and doing like, I was like, no one ever, I never got to do any of that stuff. I was like looking at charts and, mapping numbers on, graphs and, but hey, both approaches are appropriate.
I was thinking that if your movies have a common theme, it's people who are so driven to achieve excellence, no matter what the cost, and sometimes at a great personal sacrifice. Did I don't feel like the movie necessarily takes a stand, but do you often wonder, like, is the cost worth it?
Well, I think in some ways it's a question you have to ask about almost any truly kind of history-making achievement. I think sometimes we like to, we almost willfully forget how costly these achievements can be. But I think one thing that was also really interesting to me about Neil, that to me was very different from any character I had tried to film before, was that I'd filmed characters who had this sort of burning ambition to be great or be famous or whatnot. And Neil, certainly he was full of ambition, but at least the way we interpreted him, I think what was so fascinating about him is that I think in some ways he himself couldn't even articulate why the moon or why certain missions. I think in many ways he thought of himself as doing a job, and it came from this true childhood love of planes, which extended into spacecraft. But I think, again, and it was something Ryan articulated early on when we were talking about the character, I think there was something deeper to Neil that was not so much about ambition and more just about constantly wanting to see just beyond. There was a line, I think, at some point that I think we maybe took from an interview of Neil's where he refers to peeking behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Just that sort of beautiful sentiment, which I think in some ways, once you get beyond if you look beyond the space race aspect of that period of history, just that very kind of primal desire of humankind to just peek behind the curtain, and how that got sort of sublimated into one individual in this case and one pursuit. I think that sort of, that became more interesting to me, I guess, and more profound than someone who wants to be a great drummer or something. There was just, that's a very concrete goal, but this felt like it had something that was harder to put into words, and therefore I think we were really kind of motivated to try to film it.
If I could just speak a little bit about that, the cost. If you look at it in terms of the rocks that we collected, the experiments that we set up, and those type of things, it's a tough question. But if you look at it in terms of what I think we see, which is it inspired and motivated an entire generation of people to want to be better. It made them want to work harder because great things could happen and dreams could come true. And if you just take that and you multiply that by the number of people across the world, it's a very, very powerful thing. And I think that may be, the true legacy of the Apollo program.
I do want to open it up to audience questions. I think we have some mic runners out there. Just want to, let's start over here. Oh, wait, sorry, he's ready. Go ahead.
Hi, Ryan. Hi, Damien. There's a rumor that the original title of the movie was First Man La La Landing. Is it true? And then you thought about Moonlight to get a second chance for the Oscar? No, but the truth is, Ryan, what did it mean to be nominated for La La Land, and what would it mean to finally make history, getting an Oscar for First Man?
He was also nominated for Half Nelson, I just have to point out. Sorry.
I would be doing Neil a disservice to make this moment about me. I appreciate you asking, but probably better to talk about Neil in this program. The honor was to be involved with this film or to make a great film, and even more so that Rick and Mark are here is is the best outcome that for me that could have happened for this film.
I mean, I have to say, the reviews for this movie have been astounding, but that has to be the only review that matters, isn't it? Yeah. Over here.
Hi there, Jesse from CBC. I was surprised to learn that there was no green screen at all in this film. So my question was for Ryan and Corey, what was it like to be in front of this giant, like 80-foot LED screen that projected everything so that you could kind of see it the way we see it? What did that feel like, and can you describe it?
It was sort of an extension of that space camp in the sense that we were given every opportunity to feel what they felt, as close as we could get while we were filming a movie. To have Al Warden, who was Apollo 15 astronaut, right there telling us, this is when you'd flip this switch, and then to look out the window and you see pretty much what we're seeing in the movie was incredible.
I agree.
Me from Japanese magazine Cut. This question is Ryan and maybe the Damien. One small step line was so perfect. Some people thought you guys used the original recording, but I think it's from Ryan. How difficult and how important for you to make it perfect?
Oh, is this the famous line when he lands on the moon? Yeah, was that you or was that a recording of Neil?
No, it's Ryan.
I figured, okay.
I think that's arguably, one of the most famous things that's ever been said, and it was a huge, responsibility we felt to get it right. Not just in its, sonically or to parrot it, but I feel like that line says so much about what I admired about Neil, which was his ability to see everything in broader terms, that he could see a giant leap in one small step, that he could see himself as a man both representing his country and a human being representing mankind. It's such a profound thing to say, and I feel like it always fascinated me what person would say that. Who is that person that could make this heroic moment not about themselves, but about everything, and to put it so eloquently, so beautifully. It's just it was an honor to be able to say it and to get to understand. Or try and understand the man that would say something like that.
I mean, that's the line you don't want to mess up. Like, I don't know if you got it right on the first take or if you were like, a big step, oh, darn it. You had to say it a few times.
One thing that Ryan, I remember, pointed out to me early on, and that famous line is just actually one of several examples of it throughout Neil's life, is that for someone who, Neil in this case, for someone who was famous for being a man of few words, the words he did speak were often so beautiful, so perfect. There really was a poet in him, and I also find like sometimes you actually, at least I found, kind of listening to interviews or talking to former astronauts, especially those who had walked on the moon, that this sort of poet would come out of all of them, that they would, talk about, you hear phrases like sitting on God's front porch, peeking behind the curtain, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, and many other phrases I'm not even thinking of. The documentary For All Mankind is a beautiful compendium of a lot of those sentences and phrases in the astronaut's words. I think, again, it speaks to something we wanted to try to capture with the movie is that this dual dimension of the Apollo program, that on the one hand, this was a gritty, visceral, tough, grueling, very mechanical process. These were machines that were built by hand, people putting their lives at risk and hurtling off into outer space in a way that it seems astounding it ever worked. That any of them came back alive is mind-boggling. And yet there's this sort of, you can't deny the spiritual dimension to what happened. And I think that sort of, Al Bean, who a famous moonwalker who passed away recently, he devoted much of the rest of his life after the moon to painting and creating these amazing paintings of moonscapes. It's somehow tapped into this spiritual, romantic poet in all of these astronauts, whether they were fighter pilots or scientists, that I think is, sort of beautiful and speaks to that kind of dimension of the moon that I think is very hard to process and fathom. And so you try to reach for language or certain images to try to capture it.
I think we have one over there.
This is for Ryan. I'm from Portugal, and this is for Ryan, but for the Ryan filmmaker, because I loved your first film as a director, and I'm wondering if you're doing again, and if you're going to steal ideas from Damien, since now you're working so much together.
We don't steal, we call them homages.
Okay.
Yes, I'm working on another film. Thank you for mentioning the film. And I love working with Damien. I learn a lot from him. But no, you can never. Yes, thank you very much.
Can you write and direct your next film and cast Damien in it? I feel like it's
No one wants to see that.
Oh.
Damien, is it a deal?
Oh, well, if you're going to ask.
I want my 20%. We'll be in touch.
It's happened here.
You play Batman and I'll direct it.
It's done. My childhood dream.
That actually reminds me, am I mistaken, or do you guys appear in the movie?
Yes,
I know
they
you were on
do.
set, but I feel like I saw you in the film.
Well, you?
You well spotted.
Oh, sorry, is that a secret?
You obviously didn't blink.
I like to joke that, and Mark can speak to this better, of course, but Mark, we had this somewhat delicious opportunity to cast him as Paul Haney in Mission Control. So when Gemini 8 starts spinning out of control and Deke turns to Paul Haney to cut the feed, he's turning to Mark, and Mark cuts the feed on his own mom. How do you feel about that, Mark?
Well, I tried to steal a squawk box, as you will see in the movie, and that didn't work. So I needed another method.
Kyle, how did you find working with him as an actor?
I learned a lot from him.
We have one over here.
I do want to say everyone said how much material was available to do this for the actors and what have you. And it is so true. I mean, to have the folks present, it gives you so much confidence in the place that you're in, and it's really incredible. It is like Ryan said so many times. It is an honor to be able to rub elbows with some of these folks. So it's been an incredible experience.
Hi, I'm Tashana Reed with CBC News. Curious, Damien, I mean, obviously music has been such a central part of the previous films that you've done and the story, and I'm curious as to how you decided to approach how music would play a role in First Man.
Well, I mean, in some ways, Justin, the composer I work with, we've worked together since college, and we sort of have always adopted roughly the same working process, where even in this case where it wasn't a music-based movie, where sort of early on in the script stage, he was working on melodies. We were trying to figure out what the musical landscape would be. We wanted something that would hopefully sort of cut to the core of what sort of we saw in the movie emotionally, of the story of someone overcome by, and in some cases driven by, his grief. So we wanted a musical language that would capture that. And I remember early on, Ryan actually found, and it was mentioned in Jim Henson's book, but Ryan found the track itself, this theremin and orchestra track that called Lunar Rhapsody, appropriately, that Neil and Janet, that we know from the historical record, Neil and Janet loved, and that they played together in the dance to in the movie, and that Neil then later played during Apollo 11 on transmission. So Ryan dug up this anecdote, and we loved it, and we sort of kind of created a scene around it. But also just the soundscape of that track. It's very unique. It's very weird. It felt very Neil, because it's the theremin, which you think of as this sort of sci-fi kind of instrument, but it's combined with a lush orchestra, and it seemed to kind of straddle the duality of those two things. And so Justin wound up really running with that kind of language. That became, in many ways, the language of the movie, the sort of trying to combine an old vision of sci-fi, which is sort of what the landing on the moon was before people landed on the moon. It was basically science fiction and the stuff of kind of 50s sci-fi movies. Trying to find a language that was appropriate to that with old synths, 50s, 60s synths and theremin and moog instruments, and combine that with a sort of timeless orchestra, basically. And then trying to pair that with the sound design. We had an incredible sound team. Including Ai-Ling and Miliatru Morgan, who are here in Toronto, and they just, it became this sort of balancing act again of trying to know when to go silent, when to let the music take full flower, and when it wouldn't be about music at all, when it would just be about the sort of raw physicality of these rickety spacecrafts.
The theremin was actually a really big find personally, because I was looking for points of connection with Neil, and it was hard to relate to, his genius, his courage, his humility. Those are so extraordinary. I was looking for things that we had in common, and we have the theremin.
Have you played the theremin? It's so cool.
I tried, and I failed, but then our composer, Justin Hurwitz, just decided he would learn, and now he plays it beautifully.
Yeah, all the theremin you hear in the movie is Justin playing it himself, and he's he'll tell you that's all he knows how to play. But yeah, he watched YouTube videos for about 5 months and learned how to play.
He taught himself.
Yeah.
Because you're literally playing air, basically. It's amazing. But could you make a movie about theremins? Because I find them fascinating.
It's great. It'll
Yeah.
be the sequel to Whiplash.
I think we have time for one more question. Is there? Oh, you've got it. Okay.
Hi. This is on. Okay. Since you mentioned, Damien, that the music was kind of connecting to his grief, I wanted to talk a little about that, because the film does begin, or at least very early on, it does begin with Neil losing a daughter. And the way I saw the movie, that connected to a man who, with whom connecting to life on Earth was so painful that he was looking for something beyond to connect with until he got to that beyond. So I was wondering if you could maybe touch a little bit upon that, Mark, Rick, Ryan, on that story, and whether that informed Neil, whether in real life or when playing the character.
Well, as was said in the movie, it wasn't something that was ever talked about. She died on the same day as their wedding anniversary, so they basically never celebrated it, and it just wasn't something that really ever came up, in the family to talk about. The other thing I think that happened was that in the fire that we had that wasn't shown in the movie, but our house burned down basically, and a lot of the most important things that were lost were photos, from that time. So it wasn't until later that we got them from grandparents or other people that we got to see some of those back. So it was just a tough situation.
Anything you want to add?
In many ways, I think I had originally sort of in my mind kind of, and I think when I first talked to Ryan about the movie, pitched it more as a sort of mission movie, not about Apollo 11 per se, but just about the 8-year kind of span of time from the moment Kennedy said we're going to the moon to the moment that it happened. And with obviously the sort of the grief Neil was feeling as this kind of catalyst, but Ryan really connected to that aspect of the story even more so, and I think pushed me and Josh to dig into that deeper and
Kyle, really?
Hey, sorry, it's my wife.
Is it Connie Britton?
No, it's not that wife. No, I apologize.
But Ryan really sort of, I mean, it was just something that kind of, I think we, early on, and Ryan especially, sort of grabbed onto as this, not just backstory for Neil, but to try to really weave it into the fabric of the movie, again, weave it into the musical sounds of the movie. I sort of wound up rereading the story of Orpheus a lot and finding a lot of parallels in that, you know, weirdly. Again, I think as the moon landing is such a sort of hard to fathom event, you wind up turning to mythology to process it, and just something about that idea of someone who loses someone he loves and travels where humans, mortals, aren't supposed to travel. Yeah. Basically travels beyond the beyond. And, you know, whether it's to Hades or to the underworld or to the moon, this idea of kind of going across the other side in order to maybe find some solace, just seemed like a beautiful sort of metaphor for us to kind of bake into our approach.
We're out of time, so I would love to just end with like a real quick speed round question, maybe a little on the goofy side, because as much as I love this movie, I'm very claustrophobic and I was sweating a lot, especially during that opening scene. And I so admire the achievements of these men, but given the opportunity, would you ever want to go into space? Would you want to go to the moon?
No.
Thank you.
No, I'd be too scared.
Yeah. No.
I'd go, yeah.
All right, good for you. She's the adventurous one.
Nope. I would certainly have to consider it.
I feel like you're in character answering that.
I don't know if they have great cell phone service, though, Kyle.
I always wanted to be weightless. You know,
Yeah.
I thought that would be, you know, for longer than 20 seconds or whatever you get when you fly in the plane. But yeah, I think that would be awesome. And to see the Earth from up there, from everyone who goes up there and says it changes you, it affects you. Yeah, I would do it.
Absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely.
Wow.
And I'd love to take my family with me.
Yeah. Did you ever consider following in your father's footsteps, or was it?
Well, sure. You know, at the time, I think it was kind of hard to figure out. Mom or dad never really pushed us one way or the other. They just sort of, I think they led by example, but they didn't say, you know, really study this or study that. They just kind of let us find our own path, and so I was always intrigued by the space program, and of course it was changing, right, as I was growing up. So I'm still trying to figure it out.
Patrick?
Absolutely, yeah.
Way to go. Okay, so you and Olivia, and okay, we got it all figured out.
We got a crew.
Well, again, I want to not only congratulate you on such a beautiful movie, but thank you, because it is such a special filmmaking experience. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you guys, actually, for being a great audience.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.